Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us on this Friday to talk about an issue that impacts us all, climate change, and consequently the modern homes and precincts we live in and call our own. It's great to see that people are tuning in today from all over the world. We have people tuning in from Doha, Mali, Olathe. Closer home, we also have people from Satna, from Jonai in Assam, from Nashik, Maharashtra, of course, and Mumbai, which of course was one of the cities that we're talking about today. We have a great lineup for you today, and I won't take any more of your time. I will now hand the evening over to our moderator and host, Vaishnavi Chandrashekhar. Vaishnavi is a freelance journalist and editor based in Mumbai. She has worked as an editor and reporter across print, magazine, and online media for 2 decades, including the Christian Science Monitor and the Times of India. Over the years, she has reported on everything from culture to economy, but she does specialize in issues related to science, environment, and development. I now invite her to take over the session and introduce our panelists. I hope you all enjoyed this evening, and thank you so much for joining us again.
Hello, and welcome to everyone who's joined us from Mumbai, Miami, and everywhere else in the world. At first glance, these two cities don't seem like they would have much in common. They're the opposite ends of the world. And just to give some perspective, Miami has, I think, a population of less than 500,000, and Mumbai has at least 12 million. But it turns out they are similar in at least 2 respects. One, they're home to 2 of the most substantial collections of Art Deco buildings in the world. And 2, they're both coastal cities with tropical monsoon climates, which means that they face some of the sort of same challenges in a climate change scenario, the most obvious being rising sea levels. To help us understand how climate change might impact the Art Deco heritage of these 2 cities and what can be done about it, we have a stellar lineup of speakers with us today. From Miami, we have Deborah Tackett, Historic Preservation and Architecture Officer for the city of Miami Beach. Deborah has over 20 years of experience in both the private and public sector and has extensive knowledge of historic preservation, planning, urban design, architecture, and public administration. She has been responsible for overseeing the survey, research, and historic designation of 6 local historic districts and 3 National Register historic districts. We also have Krupali, Associate Professor at the School of Architecture at the University of Notre Dame. Krupali is Director of Dharma and Dwarka Labs, research teams at Notre Dame. The Dharma Lab specializes in 3D documentation of World Heritage sites, and Dwarka tackles issues related to climate change, trying to bring together scientists with practitioners planning for more resilient cities. Among other things, she's researching the impact of sea level rise in Mumbai. Our third panelist is a people's representative from Mumbai. Harshita Narwekar is a corporator with the BMC, the Brihanmumbai Municipal Corporation. She has worked extensively with the community in some of Mumbai's oldest neighborhoods, and she recently partnered with the corporation to sign an MOU with the University of Notre Dame to build climate resilience studies for the city. Her primary focus in the last few years has been on enhancing a constituency's sustainability through projects around tree plantation, waste management, and sanitation. I'm really happy to be able to moderate this session, and the way it's going to work is that we're going to have 2 presentations, first from Deborah Tackett and then from Krupali Krusche. And then we're going to open up the discussion to all the panelists, and then followed by a Q&A with the audience. Deborah, do you want to start?
Yes, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today, and I very much look forward to the conversation. I'm going to share my screen. The screen is on. Just a brief introduction. So yes, my name is Deborah Tackett. I work for the city of Miami Beach. Miami Beach is actually a group of barrier islands located to the west of Miami. We are on the southeast coast of Florida. So you can see on the aerial photograph, we're a thin, about 1 mile wide, 7.5 miles long group of barrier islands. We do have an extensive collection of Art Deco buildings. I have seen articles published saying we have the largest concentration, but I've also seen that refuted. I'm trying to find a source for that, but we have an extensive collection of Art Deco style architecture in the city. We are also primarily a tourism-based economy. We have millions of people from all over the world, which we are very grateful for, coming to visit our beautiful city. The architecture, while it's known as Art Deco, is actually quite varied in Miami Beach. We have another large collection of post-World War II modern buildings that are also recognized as historic within the city. All right. So with our historic districts, we have a total of 14 local historic districts. These were designated between the mid-1980s through our last historic district designation was 2021. So this is an evolution. We are constantly evaluating our architectural stock and identifying areas of the city that do need some protection and that are worthy of historic designation. The Miami Beach Architectural District is what people commonly refer to as the Art Deco District. This area, which is in the southern portion of the city, was first listed on the National Register of Historic Places. That's the United States federal program for identifying historic properties. What was so incredible about this designation is it was the first time the federal government recognized a collection of 20th century buildings as historic. In 1979, as most of our Art Deco buildings in the city were built in the 1930s, most of these buildings were less than 50 years old at the time of designation, which was an extremely unusual situation. And the first time the federal government said, yes, we agree, even though we don't think these buildings, meet our guidelines in terms of the 50-year requirement, this is so extraordinary and so important to cultural heritage that we will list this very large district on the National Register of Historic Places. It wasn't until 1990 that this area became locally protected against demolition. And so we have local designations, which are what is shown in the map with the shaded colors, which do preserve buildings. They do have certain protections for significant modifications to buildings, and or demolition requires a very robust public review process. Now, with our current conditions, so we are an incredibly beautiful city. We have so many positive assets, but we also have significant challenges within Miami Beach. Nearly 97% of the city's landmass and almost all of the buildings are located within a FEMA special flood hazard area. The FEMA creates maps every year, not every year, every 5 to 10 years or so. They just came out with new maps to identify vulnerable areas in this country. Primarily that helps guide the flood insurance program that the federal government offers, and sets certain elevations for finished floor levels. So that's one important thing to note. It's not only, we're trying to protect the buildings, but we're also trying to protect the ability for property owners to obtain flood insurance, which can be very challenging given the fact that most of our buildings are not conforming to the FEMA requirements. FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Department of the federal government. We have an increased risk of storm surge given our location. We sit right between the Atlantic Ocean and Biscayne Bay. Wind and rainstorms. We have flash floods, and talking about climate change, I think there's a lot of focus on sea level rise, which is a concern. However, what we're seeing currently, and it's kind of shown in this photograph, is that sunny day flooding, right? The sunny day flooding where we don't have a hurricane and we don't have a storm, but we're seeing these areas flood from the ground up. We sit on a foundation of limestone, which is a highly porous material that does allow groundwater to rise to the point where you see it in this photograph. This usually occurs during a king tide. King tides are about 4 times a year between September and November. So this has been kind of a reoccurring fall event for the city of Miami Beach. We have been designated as an adaptation action area in our comprehensive plan. So I put this slide up is because the city began our adaptation and resiliency strategy quite some time ago. We were very early in our efforts. However, when we started, this was about 10 years ago, maybe slightly longer than 10 years ago. We started in areas that were very low, that were very vulnerable, and that were not historic. We started with infrastructure. This was actually a government-led initiative at first. We got a lot of pushback from private property owners at the time because I don't think people fully understood what climate change could mean in the future for the city back then. We started in areas that were not historic districts. We started raising roads, raising sidewalks, which really had the effect of requiring railings and all these safety devices, and some of these buildings actually becoming lower than the crown of the road, lower than the street. So it was not a perfect situation. We had a lot of criticism. And we're using that now as a learning tool. In 2020, the city hired a group of consultants led by architect Alan Schulman. The consultants included engineers, landscape architects, and also structural engineers. So this was an effort to start looking at the historic districts. We understand the sensitivity of them. We understand the mistakes we've made in the past, and in areas that we could improve. And this document was one of the first, I think, at least in this country, that really looked at what do we do when we have a built environment, when we have historic buildings, how do we, adapt them without jeopardizing or harming the very special character that is so important to our residents and visitors. So this study actually looked at 2 different areas. You saw on the map, we have 14 local historic districts. We couldn't do every one, there's not a one size fits all necessarily, but we looked at 2 different study areas. And if I could just go back, this map, we looked at this area on the western side. This is the Flamingo Park Historic District, also the Miami Beach Architectural District. And then we looked at the study area along Indian Creek, which is in the Collins Waterfront Historic District. We chose those 2 areas because those were extremely vulnerable. Those areas were already experiencing that king tide flooding, and having, during the rainstorms, especially the extreme rainstorms, which are becoming more common, they were seeing flooding actually happening. So those were the 2 study areas that we looked at. Now, and at the end of my presentation, there's a link to where you can find this report. It's quite robust, but basically that report outlines things that property owners can do in order to start adapting their properties. One section of the report deals with early action items, things that can be done relatively inexpensively and quickly. Building systems such as green roof, water collection, green infrastructure, stormwater management, and future proofing. So permeable pavement, green roofs, elevating mechanical and electrical equipment above the required base flood elevation. And so that's important because I think we're going to have an incremental adaptation with a lot of these properties. These are not government-owned properties. These are private property owners that have their own timelines and their own budgets. But certain things can be done pretty quickly to start mitigating the impacts of flooding. The guidelines also developed strategies that are longer term and more aggressive strategies. One strategy was raising a building internally. So there's a lot of literature in a lot of cities. Charleston, South Carolina is a great example of cities that are just kind of saying, well, everyone has to raise their building. They have to jack up their building, put new foundations in, and have a higher finished floor. One thing that came out of this was that some buildings can be adapted actually from the inside. They don't need necessarily to be raised. So this would be keeping the walls and actually raising the finished floor level within the interior. That presents some challenges, but this is an example on the screen of a Art Deco Mediterranean Revival transitional home that actually is proposing that. They received approval, and you can see that it's quite successful. It does require a lot of intervention, but this is something that we take into consideration when we review projects. And this was received very favorably. So though there will be changes, it will be a much more resilient property. Another example this is in the Indian Creek area. And this is an example of where the city actually is raising the streets. What happens sometimes when you're raising your streets is you create almost partial basement levels of these buildings when they're below the street. In this instance, we had a property owner and developer who wanted to develop their property with this larger building at the rear of the property. In exchange for approval for this larger addition, the developer said, we're going to elevate, we're actually going to move and lift the historic building so that it is more compatible. Now here, because the sidewalk and street were already raised, raising the building does not necessarily have a negative impact on that urban character, on the streetscape. Since the street is raised, the apartment building will be raised accordingly, so that you preserve that relationship to the urban fabric. And that's all I have, because I know we want to leave time for all of these other incredible speakers. But we have a multi-prong approach in the city of Miami Beach. It's not just design and building requirements. We have on the Rising Above, mbrisingabove.com website, we have a multi-prong strategy, which you can see, which deals with a pedestrianization of certain areas, our transportation network focusing on bicycling and alternative modes of transportation. We have a street tree master plan. We also have projects, which is very important, stormwater management plans, road raising plans. And so there's a ton of information as to what the city, and all of the studies that have been done by various universities that have partnered with the city over the years are all on that website. And I think that's helpful. And then the planning department's website has all of our historic district information. So I want to thank you for your time. And I think we're going to leave some time at the end for some questions.
Thank you, Deborah, for your presentation. That was very interesting. I would like to start by thanking Vaishnavi, Suhasini, and Atul Kumarji for inviting us to speak today, and for inviting me to talk about Mumbai. Just to give you a bit of a background, I am from Mumbai. I have been living my first 18 years, 20 years of my life in Mumbai, and then I moved to United States. I've been with Notre now for over 18 years. And so the work I'm going to show is from Dwarka's research labs, and not that much from Dharma. Dharma specializes in detailed documentation of heritage properties. But today I'm just going to give, because of limitation of time, and a quick overview of what the efforts that we have initiated in Mumbai look like and the scale at which work is happening. So to begin, just to explain, we have created a consortium of people. There are many people involved from Mumbai side. Of course, the work that has been done by Harshita Narwekar is going to be critical in moving the political front of things forward. But we have been also working from the US side on things and created a consortium with faculty from Notre Dame, team members from NASA, Esri India and Esri US, Xylem, which is a water solutions systems team, Urban Design Associates, which is an urban planning team here, and Jacob Engineering, both in India and here. University of Colorado is also a collaborator with us. And then we have the India side of team members, along with ASB measuring systems that are documenting presently the water surface and water channels in and around Mumbai. And of course, the larger consortium of people that are engaged on the levels of local government, the government at state level, and then at national level. So I'm going to answer or try and answer two questions that I think are relevant for today's presentation. The first one is how climate change is going to affect the Art Deco building fabric of Mumbai, and how accurate is this projection? Because there are lots of projections out there, and how do you decide what is the best approach to move forward? And secondly, how new infrastructure and development in Mumbai can be built to help resonate the thought process of protecting what is already existing. As we all know, Mumbai, or many of us know, Mumbai is suffering presently from multiple effects of climate. There is the sea level rise, tropical storm impact that's affecting Mumbai directly, the heat island effect, flooding, which is a major criteria in monsoon for us, water scarcity, air pollution, and carbon emission. These factors are very relevant in Mumbai, and what happens is we get the monsoon season where we have extreme amounts of rain and the whole city gets flooded. And the biggest thing the authorities are trying to do is actually get the water moving out of the city as fast as possible. What is interesting to note is 0.9% of water across the globe is drinkable water. And we are taking rainwater that would have normally been possibly utilized as drinking water at some point, actually, and trying to take it and move it out of the city as soon as we can. So the British infrastructure that was built in Mumbai and later on updated by BMC has now become a tool in which we make the streets get the water runoff to move faster. On the other hand, the problem that we face, and the most relevant relation of this to why the historic buildings are going to get affected, is the fact that we are draining water from our underground water source levels. So we have the water table of Mumbai that is very often tapped into for creating drinking water source. This water is being taken out at very high speed and is causing drying of the land and land subsidence in the city of Mumbai. This is very similar to Jakarta, where we have seen concerns related to sinking city impact. And this is a concern for Mumbai because Mumbai has been based on the islands, but also on reclaimed land, which is specifically relying on the conditions underground for maintaining its height. Here, you can see the map that was, thank you for Art Deco Mumbai team, who has been mapping all the historic buildings of the city from the Art Deco period. And we can see the amount of buildings that exist in vulnerable areas. Let me explain. The markings in red indicated here are the buildings that are from the Art Deco fabric. You can see this on their website. And this, for example, shows us just the impact of sea level rise. As was mentioned in the previous presentation, sea level rise itself is not the problem. The problem is the compound effect of three things coming together. And the first is the rising sea level. And you can see the rising sea level itself impacts Mumbai just on the periphery of the city and in various mangrove areas that are more about on the city's edge. The more impactful thing is the combination of sea level rise plus flooding that happens at periods in which the city gets into a frenzy of rain, for example, in the monsoon time frame. And now that the monsoon is actually stretching much, much longer, we are having times in November, in December, where rain is coming down at times which we were not expecting it to. This is a more dramatic situation because if you start seeing and comparing the map of where the historic fabric is located and where the city is under distress, Malabar Hill area, for example, there is, there are different parts that are going to be impacted, but they are not as critical as, for example, the Marine Drive area, which we all know, we are seeing it literally when the rain comes in, the impact of that, but also in other places that are much above in stock. This becomes problematic when we add another equation to it, which is the rising temperature of the global overall heat. And this is presently projected as 1.5. If you go to a dramatic level of 3, which is very, very, it's close to impossible. But if it does happen, you'll see this little small chart that's right here that actually takes us back to the 7 islands, or not the 7 islands, but more than 7 islands that we generally were before the reclamation of land of Mumbai was taking place. So that's how concerning this problem of climate change is for Mumbai. The part that I would like to bring to our focus is that when we talk about carbon emissions, mostly when we talk about carbon emissions in the United States, it's mostly based on energy. But the reality is that when you combine transportation and building, the amount of carbon emission that is contributed is up to 75%. And this is why buildings and building stock, the way we create them, the way we maintain them, and the way we build them in the future is going to be pretty important. I'm quoting here the National Trust of Historic Preservation here based in the United States. And the critical thing they point out is bringing old buildings into the future through reuse and retrofitting is going to be one of the biggest ways in which we can contribute to reduction in carbon emission. And for the city of Mumbai, this is important because if we look at all the heritage that exists in Mumbai, the buildings that were built in Art Deco period were built from 1919 onwards. What is interesting to observe is by now that stock of buildings is 100 years old and they are still in good condition in comparison to 1975, 1980s and 1990s buildings that were built that have already started having issues with them having to be either restored, demolished, or rebuilt. And why is that happening? And the key lies in the materials that were used during the construction of these buildings, which is very different. Though we think they are concrete, they are built in a different way and the way they were built. So it's important to understand, and I know that this work has already been started, but I think what Miami already has done, we need to do for the Art Deco buildings in Mumbai, which is to first create documentation of these properties, making sure that we have all plans, elevations, materials ready, form historic precincts for them, beyond the precincts that we have created for the fort area, for all the value that we give for before 19th century, 20th century buildings in Mumbai, and then specifically look at those in relation to understanding climate concerns. If we start doing that, one key part that comes in front of us is how do we go about with this process? And for that, we have developed 2 different phases. Phase 1, which is data collection and analysis, and phase 2, which is risk assessment and resiliency planning. Now, I talked about two things that affect majorly the climate and the building stock of Mumbai. The first one was flooding, and the second one was sea level rise. But there is another one, and that is vertical land motion. And vertical land motion is the one that is contributed because of the way we use underground water in Mumbai, and also because of general ways in which the behavior of land long-term is. And when you see this, there is a major question that comes in front of us. How many buildings should, or how many high-rises should Mumbai ever build? And I know this is a big debate in Mumbai, and I wanted to project or identify a similar method of study that was done in Manhattan, in New York, where they started looking at vertical land motion of the stock in Manhattan and how it is behaving. And there is an average 1 to 2 millimeter change and land subsidence that is happening. And it can go up to 4 millimeters per year in certain parts of Manhattan because of the weight of the buildings, because of the movement, because of the infrastructure pressures, because of water needs coming cumulatively together. And this is important because if you look at the Art Deco stock that's in downtown area of Mumbai, this is the Fort, the historic properties that are already marked. These areas in Fort are the highest density in Mumbai, even higher density than any of the other areas. Dharavi has a higher density, but so does the Fort area. And I did that as a PhD study. So I know that the highest density was achieved in certain parts of the Fort. And what I found out during that study is that if you use the FSI of Mumbai, which was originally created, which is 1.3 FSI, and you give it a footprint, I've given the same footprint for 4.0 FSI and 1.3 FSI. And if you look at these, the amount of land utilized is the same. But you could have a 4-story building with a 4.0 FSI, which occupies the full ground, or you can have a skyscraper or a larger building on top, which are with many stories. And that the impact and the infrastructure pressure that creates is much higher. The Art Deco buildings have been traditionally built to be 4 to 5 stories tall in Mumbai. And they have been built in a manner that creates a very good urban setting for them. Their footprint, the way they were recorded, they allowed for much better improvement in movability and flexibility of urban sequences. But at the same time, they did a good job in making sure that we had good urban densities that were created. And that is getting lost in Mumbai today. And these buildings, if documented well, if understood well, can actually be, in a way, a good prescriptive method for understanding how new construction can happen with the type of materials that they were originally made and reusing that methodology. I would say what we have begun already is creating an understanding of all the data that we already have and creating a GIS system of just getting it connected with everything that's already existing within the city's parameters and information, added new information about the stock of buildings and fabric of the city today. And we have started with University of Colorado examining and understanding the vertical land motion of the city's fabric. You can start noticing that there are certain areas, those that are marked in red are more concerning than others. And those areas are the ones that are actually moving down at a faster rate. And so examining and understanding what that would mean for the historic properties of Mumbai is a critical aspect, because these buildings, they are behaving in a manner that has survived over the last 100 years, but how will they perform over the next another 100 years, if possible, is the critical question here. NASA has been able to help us understand and indicate through satellite data on how and how predictable this information is, how accurate it is, what we have been talking about. The dire information out there is not as accurate as when you start examining and understanding the details of different areas in the city. It is important to note that there are 3 different levels of studies that are going on. One is regional level, the other is city level, and then there are studies on local precinct levels. Each of them important to understand different approaches in climate support that needs to happen for creating a resiliency plan of the city. So for the planning itself, we are looking into land use, energy efficiency, protection of natural habitat, protection of the city's ratio in relation to farmland and natural resources, and then creating better infrastructure that allows for urban growth, but in a manner that is not taking away from the fabric, but creating an accessible plan. The most important thing of all that I would like to end with is Mumbai was created in 1600s with very much of nature and natural setting. Before 1600s, fishermen used to live in this area in balance with nature. We have grown Mumbai so much today that we have lost this connection with nature. We need to bring it back. We need to bring the balance back for us to be able to have a much more better response to climate. Thank you.
Thank you, Krupali and Deborah, for those 2 great presentations. I want to stay with Mumbai and I want to come to Harshita. And Harshita, you're sort of representing government and people, so to speak. And, you know, the plans that Krupali has talked about, what are the chances that they would actually get implemented? How much resistance or, you know, is there, you know, among communities, government? How willing are they to listen? And the reason I ask is because, you know, we had a Mumbai climate action plan a few years ago, and that doesn't seem to have gone anywhere. So maybe you can speak to from a government and people perspective.
All right. Thank you, Vaishnavi. Thank you, Debbie and Krupali, for sharing what Miami and Mumbai, you know, Mumbai probably has to do and Miami has been doing. I think it's a very insightful presentation. Well, for Mumbai, I would speak for Mumbai. It has been, I've been working with Krupali, actually. She presented, you know, their study way back in 2020, January. And since then, we've been trying to see how we can, you know, get the study commissioned and the solutions implemented soon. Unfortunately, we had the COVID, so you're kind of delayed. But I would say that for now, we've done the MOU with the BMC, which is, actually data exchange, so that we have more on-ground data, which is, regarding the stormwater drainages and how do they do the water management, so that we have a better understanding of what they are doing, what their systems are underneath, with the, and that data can be very useful for the study that, Dr. Krupali is doing. So we're trying to do that bit. For the Eastern waterfront, we are pushing for, I think Dr. Krupali has been interacting with the MPPT, Mumbai Port Trust, for some time. And now I think it's in the last stages of, finalization. The MOU might be, final. It's gone for approval. We'll be trying to use the current dispensation in the government, which is very pro climate, pro environment. Also under the leadership of Narendra Modi ji, even the country is looking at climate very seriously. We're also in talks with the central government to push it with the Honorable Environment Minister, Mr. Bhupendra Yadav ji, for pushing the study in Mumbai. But say if we come back to Mumbai, we're looking at MMRDA has actually gone ahead and done an RFP for climate, studies, and Dr. Krupali, University of Notre Dame was one of the applicants for that. So I think there is a little bit of movement and understanding of the emergency of, what the climate, change holds for Mumbai city. We are also seeing just recently, even the state government has formed a climate action committee. So we are seeing that they are serious about it. It's just that I think because of, it takes a little while longer. The sense of urgency has to be built. And that's why I think public representatives, if they get involved, it makes, putting these technical experts and all the, people in government come together, and then you kind of push through and make sure that these things move forward as fast as possible, because I think the urgency of the situation is such that we don't have time at hand to do the studies, because if we start the studies now, it will be probably another 2 to 3 years, I think, for the data to be assimilated, and then we can come up with some kind of an understanding of which areas are more prone to flooding, like a location specific study can be done. And then location specific, solutions can be suggested by the experts in the consortium. In terms of pushing at our level, we are making sure that we are, representing with the state as well as with the, MMRDA and BMC and BPT as well, because the only challenge here tends to be that Mumbai has various, government agencies there. So trying to get all of them on the same page, and they have different data sets that they have. So they all, we need to make sure that we have all of those on one platform, with obviously the studies that University of Notre Dame will do for us, and then come up with solutions. As Dr. Krupali was saying, having a green and a resilient city, it's actually more so in terms of the adaptation strategies that would be recommended require a lot more engagement from the government, because unless they set guidelines for the buildings that are there and for the upcoming buildings that will be coming up, it'll be difficult for anybody to adapt. And having citizens in getting involved, we can probably do smaller things like make sure that water management, as you said, as Debbie mentioned, they're doing rainwater harvesting, so that there is less water going into the stormwater drain, less water runoff. It can be done individually, but it'll be a larger effort that would be required. If it's done through the government, it'll be easier. And our effort has been constantly to push the government at Mumbai city, because we want to, we live here, so we want to have Mumbai as a pilot. And then if there are 12 cities that are identified in all of India that are prone to, sea level rise and flooding. So we want to make sure if we are successful here, it can be replicated, not just in India, but globally. It can be something we can replicate everywhere.
Thanks, Harshita. Can I ask Deborah and Krupali to switch their videos on so that we can have kind of see each other for this conversation? Deborah, as well as Krupali, I'm one of the things debates that comes up, and perhaps Deborah, since Miami is implementing a plan, is the relative importance of hard solutions versus soft solutions, or what they call gray or green infrastructure. That is, hard being seawalls and pumps, and soft being sort of more nature-based kind of systems. I mean, I think in Mumbai too, there's a tendency to kind of drift towards the harder ones. What has it been like in Miami?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point. So when we started our strategy and implementing, we didn't have an overall plan like we do now. So we started with the hard infrastructure, the raising of the roadway, the reinforcement or replacement of some of our very aged stormwater systems underground. And then shortly after that, we started with a very aggressive pump system. And those pumps popped up in residential neighborhoods, and they're huge, and they also have to be elevated because they have electrical panels. So we started getting a lot of pushback. those things are, we're a low scale city. They're very hard to hide. They're 15 feet sometimes tall or taller, and they take up a large footprint. So I would say in the past 5 years, there has been a shift and in more of a balance to go toward green and blue infrastructure. We have a program for living seawalls. We have a program for bioswales. So I think, and that's really, that's really been driven by a lot of residents in the city wishing to have a softer solution. We also have a very robust requirement for native landscape that can actually hold into the water, the mangrove restoration. We also have a program for coral reef restoration, which is one of our major defenses against stormwater and storm surge during a hurricane event. So yes, we started with the hard. There was some pushback. I don't think a lot of people understood how oppressive it can be, just from a neighborhood character perspective. And now we're looking at a combination. I don't think necessarily the solution would be one or the other. I think it is a combination of both.
Right. Krupali, I mean, if you have any comment on that, and sort of also to extend that, because Mumbai's situation is particularly dense, the density is so high. How do you find those balances in such limited space?
So let me begin by saying, what is important in making these new solutions is to understand the mistakes that have already happened in other places and understand, okay, we don't want to go the same path. We actually want to learn from them and grow and understand actually catch up much faster in some ways because of the learning and appreciate that what has already been done. So an example for this is the Jakarta wall. The fact that wall is not actually sustaining itself. And that is not a very useful solution. So the green solutions or the blue solutions that Deborah was talking about are very essential. They're not just, okay, let's make the citizens happy and let's put those few here and few there and call it a day. It's actually the way to move forward. And so one of the things we started with, and the part that has actually progressed the fastest, is that Mumbai's eastern waterfront, which is not a developed area, is presently a $1 trillion development project. And the initial idea that was put forward was not having any environment or resiliency component to it. And so after many years of debate, we have gotten to the point that we are actually bringing these kind of, much more greener solutions to the development, such that before the development even happens, we can talk about making sure that this area doesn't become another catastrophe on the footprint of the city of Mumbai. The second part is that all local communes need to start understanding that they have to do some things that are going to be on the local level. And then there is the city level, which Harshita was talking about, which is BMC's approach to it and what BMC can do as infrastructure improvements to the city. When Deborah talks about these pumps, Mumbai is fighting with pumps all the time. We have water levels in the sea much higher to certain areas than the city itself, like certain points of the city. And so this is present condition. This is not even projected condition. And how and what can be done about that without losing the kind of let me explain. The cities of the world have been made with the attitude that we want to make water run away from us as fast as we can. We don't want to collect it. Whereas we need to have much more perforated materials that allow for seepage of water within. And this attitude, while there have been prescriptive guidelines given in many cities, Mumbai is far from adapting it because of the high density we have. And so we need to have ways. Water harvesting has been done beautifully in Mumbai by building owners. That was something that was taken up by, community societies. And there are ways in which there could be more that can happen in that direction. So there is the citizen front that needs to do more. And then there is the government front that could do better. And both sides have to match up to be able to come to a better solution.
To continue, one of the things we've talked a lot about water, but Deborah and Krupali, what kind of threat does heat pose to buildings and specifically historical
buildings? It's a very timely question, right? The state of Florida, Miami Beach, is going through one of our hottest periods on record. We've had weeks of record-breaking temperatures. Which is causing some concerns, right? Primarily, we've noticed that our coral infrastructure, the natural infrastructure, our coral reefs that have been, reinforced over the years, are dying. So the coral is dying. People don't necessarily, unless you are an avid scuba diver or snorkeler, understand what that means. That means that some of our protection from the storms is dying and cannot come back to life. So that's an immediate issue that the county and some of our local governments are working on, along with the universities, to actually, and it's quite an endeavor, to actually remove some of the dying coral, try to heal it, and then put it back when necessary. But we see, we have a climate here that is tropical. So you can see what happened in, other areas of the United States with the fires and that type of thing. Currently, our water infrastructure is holding, at least, but we are seeing some landscape. If you have an extremely hot day, that requires more landscape, more water for the landscape. Where are you taking that water from? We will have issues with fresh water, even in Florida, where we have an abundant aquifer and sources of fresh water. That will become more of an issue the hotter the temperature gets. That creates resiliency challenges. That creates social problems. And I think we have adopted in the city of Miami Beach heat island ordinances, where we require any private property owner to utilize high albedo surfaces, porous materials for any of the paving that is proposed. We also encourage green roofs, blue infrastructure. But just from a social aspect, if it's 119 degrees with a heat index, that stops people from walking. That puts people in their cars, which then exacerbates the problem. So I think it's a multi-pronged approach. It's citizens and government, as Krupali said. I thought that was very important to note. I mean, there's a political aspect of this. And I think that needs to be, first and foremost. There's a funding aspect of this, which political support is definitely needed.
Yeah, I'm getting a bunch of questions from the audience. So let me dive into that. Krupali, how challenging has it been to do a data and documentation study in Mumbai or other parts of India? Have you found there to be gaps in available information?
I think it's a political nightmare if I answer that question. But let me say it this way. I think there are data sets that are available from different entities. And the biggest issue is to try and map them together in a manner that's readable for all on one platform. And that is like the critical part or aspect that makes compound understanding of information better. So if and this is a problem not just in India, by the way, it's also in the United States. There is data sets from NOAA, there are data sets from NASA, there are data sets from USGS and every other agency. And they're presently, as we speak, they're working on trying to get an understanding of how to put all these together. So this is not just an India problem. This is a problem that is gapingly in many countries. And what we need to understand is different people have worked in different ways for a long, long time and collected the data for different purposes. But when it comes to climate, we need to bring all these data sets together. And that is the difficult part. In India, there is also loss of data that happens. Just storage and information collection over a long time becomes a difficult thing. And so how can we have actually a system that allows for data spans from more than 40 years, 50 years? So predictability is better, is important. And that sometimes is also a loss situation.
Right. Harshita, there's a question for you. In your work as a municipal corporator, how much awareness have you observed among ordinary people towards modern heritage beyond the UNESCO present, beyond the Fort Marine Drive area?
So sadly, but I don't see as much awareness regarding the heritage in terms of, but I would say that there is, thanks to a lot of attention that is brought by, getting the World UNESCO heritage, at least for the Art Deco buildings and all of the, inscribed buildings, we are getting a lot of attention from the government as well. Because we had this conversation with our honorable speaker, and he was also quite concerned about the same thing in terms of how to make sure that these preservations and conservation efforts are in the direction so that are put in motion. Because right now I don't see as much interest or awareness in the citizens, but I would say that once we start seeing the beauty and how they start to preserve the existing heritage structures, we'll probably get more awareness regarding that.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
Debbie, there are two questions for you. The first is, in the West, there's been a lot of pushback, or what is being called greenlash or backlash on environment-related policy, given the cost of energy transitions. How challenging has it been to bring modern heritage into the conversation at a policy level? And I think there's a related question, whether the tourism economy helps fund resiliency or actually increases the challenge. So perhaps you can take the first one first.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, that's either there is a lot, I'm lucky to work for an extremely supportive government, a government that does look at the scientific information, that respects that. And while there is a lot of pushback, the state of Florida that I live in, that we are in, that government has their own concerns about requiring additional regulations. We've been able to balance in the city of Miami Beach require these additional requirements with with allowing property rights to continue. We've had some pushback. We have been sued. We had a ban on, for example, plastic bags. So none of the stores could use plastic bans. We also had a ban on plastic straws. And we have faced legal challenges with some of that. Now we've been successful. We have partnered, again, we have great partners with the private sector, which is helpful. But yes, if you come to Miami Beach, we prevailed, and you will get a straw that is made out of paper. We recently banned smoking on Miami Beach. That was relatively controversial, but the state actually supported us in that. That's important because those cigarette remnants end up in our ocean and in our wildlife. So it has been challenging. And this country, there are certain areas that are really progressive and really being aggressive with their solutions, which I believe the city of Miami Beach is. And then there's other areas that are ignoring the problem. We don't have the option of ignoring the problem because we are seeing flooding. Even without a storm, we are seeing significant flooding due to the king tide. So, I think it's a balance. I think a supportive resident population and a supportive government is essential. And the second question was,
is this sort of $1 billion tourism economy, does it help fund resiliency or does it pose its own challenges?
I mean, it definitely helps fund resiliency. It has challenges. It helps fund resiliency because the city of Miami Beach has what is called a resort tax. That resort tax is charged on hotel lodging, on food and beverage. That brings in a significant amount of funding for the city. And the city has been using, not only funding the income that we're receiving, also through grants for these infrastructure projects. They are extraordinarily expensive. The infrastructure, the hard projects the pump stations are extremely expensive. And we've been lucky being so successful with tourism that, we've been able to secure a lot of funding. Now, the challenge is, the biggest challenge came when COVID hit, right? When COVID hit, the tourism industry stopped. It stopped. We recovered quickly, but we did not know that at the time. At that point, we realized that it was going to be very important moving forward to diversify our economy. So the city is actively working to diversify our economy, to have more of a live-work balance. We also believe is going to be better for resiliency. Right now, we have a huge traffic problem. And so by creating more office space, by creating more residential units within walking distance to offices and to our commercial properties, we think will improve the resiliency of the city and the region in general.
For the
Sorry.
sorry, I'm just going to add.
Yeah, go on.
I'm just going to add something to the whole UNESCO concept of, protecting heritage through tourism. This concept was brought about, of course, at the time where UNESCO precincts were not as well maintained, and they wanted to bring this in to bring tourism to help support their long-term viability. I think there's a fine balance between economic development and being able to generate economic value in relation to the impact of tourism. And we have seen a very crass examples of these, for example, in Venice or in cities that are flooded with tourists. Rome, for example, has this too. You start understanding that at some point there's a shift between just tourists coming, and they're coming in hordes of groups, just coming to a place, looking at it, experiencing, and then walking away. And the amount of, let's just not say carbon emission, but also impact they leave, such that it becomes impossible for the local commuters, the local people, to even reside in that place because the cost of everything has gone up. They can't live in that space anymore because it's so expensive. People cannot live in Venice anymore. They live in Mestre, another city right besides Venice, because it's not possible to have that kind of quality of life anymore. So when we think about our Art Deco heritage, and we think about getting tourism to be generated out of it, and how we need to be careful about how far we take things. And the point Deborah made about walkability and letting people have other functions, that's so critical, because people are moving away from office spaces now. In general, there is this work from home attitude that has come about. How do you generate ways in which you create healthy benefits for people and at the same time allow people to have walkable distances from everything that they have. And Mumbai has one of the biggest commuter problems, right? We know that. It's impossible to get people to live in safe areas. And a lot of things have been done around that. But one of the things we are missing is character. The character of the city of Mumbai that has historically existed, that is now getting lost. And what can we do that will generate ways in which people can move around and feel that they are as much a part of the newer parts of Mumbai as they are of the historic parts of Mumbai? I think that is a more important thought process to have.
Okay, great. I think we're out of time. And so just thank you to all the panelists for this very interesting conversation. I think there are many more questions to ask and discuss, but we're going to close with this. And yes, thank you so much.